12 years ago, everyone was talking about him. Here he is on the cover of Time magazine. Here he becomes the youngest billionaire in the world. And there, a film about him wins an Oscar. Mark Zuckerberg was constantly before us until he disappeared completely at some point. No one even talks about him on the network, though half the Earth's population uses the resources he developed, bought or enhanced every day. To understand the scale, there are 500 million more Facebook users in the world today than all Christians of all branches combined. But all we hear about him lately is that Zuckerberg is a biorobot, or that he is an alien. Before diving into Zuckerberg's history, I thought that everything interesting about him had already been told in the film The Social Network, how a Harvard boy conquered the world, and I was gravely mistaken. When we were preparing this video, we studied all available media publications and all significant sources, interviews with Zuckerberg, his colleagues and close ones. And we realized the world somehow missed an incredible historical parallel that lies on the surface. If you are lovers of history, you will certainly appreciate it. This video is a major profile on Mark Zuckerberg. Today, we will delve into how Zuckerberg lost $85 billion and still remained at the top of the Forbes ranking. Why is he building an underground city bomb shelter? Why are some convinced that he is not human but an alien? And which Roman emperor's fate does Mark Zuckerberg's life so strongly resemble? Stories that every successful person must have had a very difficult childhood have long become cliches. Only in Zuckerberg's case, this rule doesn't apply. Mark was born in New York in May 1984, when Reagan was still the President of the States. Zuckerberg's parents are New York doctors. They, and especially his father, Edward, predetermined the future of Mark and his 3 sisters. Edward was a fan of technology and with a great deal of experience. Even in the early 80s, when the computer still resembled a fancy toaster from the outside, he was filling the house with electronics. Edward Zuckerberg said that such techno-optimism is the only way to stay ahead of the rest. The obsession with gadgets reached the point of absurdity. For example, Edward began conducting his financial affairs at Citibank, the first online bank of that time. Paying 3 checks there took a whole hour, and his wife Karen was very annoyed by this. Later she would say, "He waited an hour for what I could have done by hand in 5 minutes. I thought he was crazy." The Zuckerberg parents raised their children in a house that was among the first in the entire area to have a computer and the internet. At the age of 10, Mark was taught the Atari Basic Language, a kind of ancient thing on which video game consoles like Dendy were programmed. Next was the C++ language. Programmers still consider it complex, and Mark took it and mastered it literally at the age of 10. But as they say, there's nowhere without practice. We know Mark Zuckerberg as a social media developer, but few are aware that at the age of 11 he created his first genuine messenger when his father operated a dental clinic from their home. Even today, this mode of work has its nuances. But at that time, what truly irked Zuckerberg's father was the stairs. To converse with family members during breaks between work, he had to climb up and down the stairs hundreds of times a day. It was then that Mark decided to assist his father by inventing a family messenger called Zucknet. With its help, any family member could, without leaving their computer, message another to find out, for example, what would be for dinner that day. Naturally, the young Mark's talents did not go unnoticed. His parents took his education seriously. Initially, they hired a personal tutor for development, but the teacher found it challenging. 10 years later, he admitted that Mark quickly surpassed him in his own subject. In his free time, Mark, even at a very young age, attended graduate courses at Mercy College. To keep up with his student, the tutor had to prepare for lessons with doubled effort. Already in high school, Zuckerberg was sent to a prestigious academy in New Hampshire. His parents could afford this, and as a prodigy, Mark was talented in everything. In sports, he became the captain of the school's fencing team, and in literature, he graduated high school with this specialization. His linguistic abilities have been preserved to this day, Naturally, he also grasped programming languages swiftly. However, young Mark had another secret passion, the Roman Empire, quite seriously. Much later, when Mark spent his honeymoon in Rome, his wife joked, "There were 3 of us in Rome. Me, Mark, and Emperor Augustus." In short, a typical man, thinking about the Roman Empire approximately every day. Jokes aside, this fact is as important to our story as his interest in programming, because it was the first emperor, Octavian Augustus, who became a role model for Zuckerberg throughout his life. And you will further be convinced of this. In the suburb of New York, White Plains, where Zuckerberg hails from, there are only 60,000 inhabitants. But apart from the creator of the largest social network, many famous and talented individuals were born and raised there. For example, the scholar Joseph Campbell, who created a bestseller from the idea that all mythical heroes follow a single path. The youngest grandmaster in the USA, Hikaru Nakamura, and many others. Talent is, among other things, a product of the environment where a person lives. In school, Mark was already a strong programmer. In his childhood, he single-handedly created games, and in high school, he presented something more serious for the first time: the Synapse player. The program analyzed the user's favorite music and offered similar playlists. In essence, it was a prehistoric recommendation algorithm, something present today on all music platforms. The project had local success. At some point, Mark and his partner were contacted by Microsoft and offered a contract worth almost $1 million. "Well, come to us, we'll develop your player." But they refused. Harvard was on the horizon. Mark's parents could afford any university and any business. Rumor has it that Mark was even given a choice. If you want, go to Harvard. If you don't want to study, we'll buy you a McDonald's franchise. But it wasn't just about the money. It might seem that his parents threw money around. However, there were almost no thoughtless, lavish expenses. And here we move on to upbringing. The most unusual thing about the Zuckerberg family is not that they had Mark, but that all their children became very successful people. One sister is in investments, another in literature, and the third, like her brother, in business. What did they do to raise 4 successful children? Edward Zuckerberg himself answers this. He admits that he never dreamed of such a business dynasty, but in upbringing he adhered to 4 principles. The first is safety, existential and financial. To succeed, you always have to take risks, and it's much more likely that a child will show courage if they know they have a safety net. Home, family, and some pocket money. Next, it's important to identify and encourage your children's interests. Want to draw? Go draw. Like to sing? By all means, here's a tutor. Instead of directing children in a specific direction, one should recognize and support their strengths. The third is limitation. Freedom does not equal permissiveness. Zuckerberg Sr. advises establishing rules within the family, and most importantly, as a parent, adhere to them yourself. Finally, work and life. The proverbial work-life balance. A successful career did not prevent Mark's parents from spending time with their children. Indeed, even their son had time for leisure. He once admitted that if he hadn't played computer games, he wouldn't have thought about how they were made. And perhaps he wouldn't have gone into programming. Let's note. Here is Mark Zuckerberg version 1.0. A brilliant student, an accommodating honor student, and a son of loving, let's be honest, wealthy parents. He has been passionate about technology and coding since childhood, but to achieve success, even this is sometimes not enough. Mark's other talents were revealed precisely at Harvard: boldness and the ability to disregard rules. We deliberately haven't mentioned another passion of young Zuckerberg. It was hacking. Mark's classmates recalled that while they were anxious about enrolling, Mark was obsessed with computer hacking. He seriously considered entering this market and was already calculating potential profits. It all started with an innocent program called Course Match. It allowed students to see who among them had chosen which courses. Want to attend the same classes as your friends? Go ahead. Everything would have been fine if Mark hadn't used the student database without permission. But the administration turned a blind eye. After all, the idea was still great. and the fact that Mark got away with it became a turning point. One day, young Zuckerberg got drunk. It's a common occurrence, youthful indiscretion. Instead of calling up his exes, in one night he hacked Harvard's database, downloaded private photos of all the female students and posted in his blog on LiveJournal. "I am a bit drunk, not going to lie. Before me was a catalogue of photographs of students from one dormitory. What if I put these animals' photos side by side and let people vote on who is more attractive?" No sooner said than done. On the night of October 28th, the FaceMash site went live. In just a couple of days, students cast almost 30,000 votes on it, an amusing detail. The directories from which he downloaded the photographs and personal data of students were called Facebooks. The FaceMash situation became scandalous. The country's best university was hacked in a couple of hours by a drunken student. There was little doubt about who was behind the site, thanks to the blog posts on LiveJournal. The university's ethics committee considered expulsion, but in the end everything was settled. Mark apologized and they left him alone. By the way, he later retracted his words about students being animals, claimed he wrote some nonsense while drunk, as happens to anyone, but it seems Mark truly considered his users as peculiar lab mice. Each new development helped him understand people's behavior a little better, what interests them, what they like, what irritates them. But all these antics were just training for hacker Zuckerberg. Mark realized that it was time to do something truly big. As we all know, that was Facebook. Disclaimer: I'm not going to retell the movie The Social Network, which many have probably already seen. Instead, let's go through the major milestones and not forget the details that were omitted in the film. So it all didn't begin with Zuckerberg, but with the Winklevoss twins from Harvard. They decided to create a social network for students. The idea was not original. A similar social network was already working at Stanford. Winklevoss had both the idea and the finances. They lacked a competent programmer. This is when they approached Mark, then already notoriously known for FaceMash. He immediately agreed. He was interested in taking on such a big, ambitious project. Initially, he thought he would manage quickly, but after a couple of days of work, his enthusiasm waned. Then he began, under various pretenses, citing different reasons, to postpone meetings and say that the work would take longer. This continued from November of the year 2003 to February 2004, until a new site unexpectedly appeared at Harvard, the Facebook. It had everything the Winklevoss wanted to do, and a little more. For instance, on the profile, you could set a status like looking for a relationship or willing to go on a date. The Winklevoss did not like this turn of events. They filed a lawsuit against Zuckerberg for stealing their ideas and code. The legal battle went on for several years, but the court never managed to decide anything. On one hand, a verbal agreement over lunch at Harvard is not a contract. On the other, the brothers claimed all the evidence was on Mark's hard drive, which needed to be seized. But the court would not consent to it, as there were no grounds. Eventually, the parties reached a settlement. Mark compensated them with $65 million in stocks. It must be said this was a very good deal for the brothers. The value of the stocks soared, as did the twins' fortune. Today they are both billionaires. Yet only Zuckerberg understood the true scale of the leading social network. If the Winklevoss thought about connecting universities, then Mark aimed to conquer the entire world. How did he achieve this? Firstly, incrementally. Initially, Mark targeted colleges, then schools. His expansion was very organic from the start. That was the trick. Imagine yourself as one of Facebook's early users. Why would people sign up on a site where nobody knows anyone? But if you know that your friend and mutual acquaintances from other universities are already on the site, it's a different matter. Next, the appearance. Facebook had one main competitor, the site MySpace. However, by that time, MySpace had already deteriorated. The site turned into an online junkyard. Unreadable usernames, bright pages which users themselves created. Meanwhile, Zuckerberg's social network looked as austere as possible. Registration was only possible under one's real name. The famous blue-white design couldn't be changed. It was created by Mark himself. The choice of palette was simple. Zuckerberg was colorblind. Blue, white and grey were the colors he could see best. All this helped people feel comfortable on the site. There was none of the overload sensation typical of other platforms. And of course the technology, unlike competitors who couldn't keep up with technical progress. Early on, Zuckerberg was concerned with finding the best. Even at Harvard, he conducted hackathons, competitions for developers for speed. The quickest he would recruit for himself. The company's ideology was also appealing. Zuckerberg's motto during the Harvard era, "Move fast, break things." He was simply obsessed with developments that could change the world. The developers and engineers were thrilled by this. They weren't afraid of making mistakes and bringing something offbeat to the boss, because they knew every idea had a right to exist. And Zuckerberg, among them all, was just another engineer. Undoubtedly the first among equals. Yet still a worker who sat behind his laptop and coded. Colleagues called Mark an excellent manager. Despite his status, he fully immersed himself in the work and spent a lot of time refining the details. Yet within Mark, with all his IT vision, another important quality was born: a ruthless business mindset. First, he left the Winklevoss brothers behind, and later Eduardo Saverin, the company's first investor, with whom he launched Facebook. When the site reached the point of attracting major investors, Zuckerberg diluted Eduardo's shares, reducing his 30% to about 1%. According to the contract Mark presented Eduardo Saverin, Eduardo relinquished all intellectual rights and voting power to Mark. Mark became the sole head of the company. It was here that the paths of a hacker from Harvard and the first emperor of Rome crossed for the first time. The cunning with which Mark conquered his company resembles all too closely the behavior of the young Octavian. Initially, history did not remember him as an emperor, but as the boy whom Gaius Julius Caesar named in his will. It would seem straightforward. The law is on your side, go and rule. But Octavian had a rival, and his name was Mark Antony. Even though he was not mentioned in the will, the army was on his side, and there was nothing the lawful heir could do about it. So he acted more cunningly. He approached Mark not with a claim, but with a proposal. Let's rule together, eliminate all troublemakers, find Caesar's murderers. And the offer was accepted. He, Octavian, and Lepidus formed the triumvirate. For a while they ruled together, but all this time Octavian was gaining strength, reputation, and wealth. And then, when the time came, he declared war on Mark Antony, which he won and took what was his. Both Octavian and Zuckerberg were talented in their youth, but they lacked resources to handle matters alone, be it the first serious investments or a regiment of Roman legionaries. Both seized power through cunning and behaved quite ruthlessly. History remembers moments when Octavian Augustus finished off wounded opponents with the words, "The birds will take care of your burial." What do we see? It was at Harvard where Zuckerberg version 2.0 appeared. A daring hacker visionary who climbed over others and changed the world over a few months of coding in a dormitory. And regarding the film, The Social Network. Witnesses of those events say everything is generally similar, but the real Zuckerberg was not even half as cool as Jesse Eisenberg's character. On screen, his sociopathy was cranked up to the max, as if Mark was an evil genius, but in reality he was much simpler. And perhaps most importantly, Eduardo Saverin was not a victim. The film shows that Zuckerberg deceived him simply due to differing positions. Eduardo wanted to sell advertising while Mark did not. It doesn't even mention that Saverin sometimes behaved oddly. For instance, he once went off to New York and left Zuckerberg without money. It got to the point where Mark's parents, who were not poor people, had to take a loan for new servers for their son's company. Therefore, Zuckerberg's cunning was not denied. But the situation was somewhat different from what the movie showed. And what was the result? A new social media star lit up and grew at an incredible speed for several years until the first crisis occurred. In the year 2007, Zuckerberg was 23 years old. He was already the owner of the largest social network in the world. At that time, Facebook had 50 million users. The figure, of course, was impressive, but here's the problem. The social network used to grow exponentially, but then it kind of stalled. Employees began to wonder if they had hit a ceiling. Then Mark decided to max out his principle of move fast and break things. The Facebook team began overflowing with ideas, and everyone proposed innovations. They started, of course, with localization. The social network was translated into other languages for the first time. Zuckerberg initiated a global expansion. This was followed by the integration of third-party applications, famous minigames and quizzes, and of course, a communication chat which came to be known as the Messenger. Thus, step by step, Facebook once again began to grow. This growth continued up until recent years, when it once again hit a ceiling. However, while in 2007 the limit was at 50 million users, today it is nearly 3 billion people. To grasp this, consider that in recent years, Mark has been actively investing in Africa for very rational reasons. There are simply hundreds of millions of potential clients still without internet access. But that is the current task. In the year 2006, Mark faced a more serious problem. The social network was not generating revenue. Certainly, Mark's personal fortune was estimated at $500 million. For an ordinary person, this figure is insane, but not for a businessman whose products are used by millions worldwide. One option for monetization was to admit advertisers, for instance. This idea was actively proposed by Eduardo Saverin, and you remember how that ended. Zuckerberg considered such decisions disrespectful to the user and to himself. He was unwilling to spoil his brainchild with unsightly banners until the last. Then, he, along with his team, devised an elegant solution that once again changed everything. The targeting system in Facebook ads. What is at the core of this? Why does advertising annoy us? It's intrusive, breaks the flow of the content we consume, and frankly, it distracts us. Be it a TV commercial break or a pop-up ad in mobile games. What did Zuckerberg do? He created a system that appears entirely unintrusive, looks appropriate in the news feed, and finally is based on your interests. The last aspect is the most important. Facebook began legally selling user data to marketers and large companies. They were able to learn individuals' preferences, which pages they subscribed to, which groups they belonged to, not to mention the basic socio-demographic characteristics such as age, gender, and place of residence. Businesses could now learn everything about a person that they had been unable to for years. What is the paradox of the situation here? Many people dislike vendors and hawkers at markets, or those who knock on apartment doors or ride the subway trying to sell us self-sharpening knives, unnecessary water filters, and various electric fly swatters. Because they intrude, they act unethically, but everyone forgets that supercorporations know literally everything about us. What we want for our birthday, where we dream of vacationing, and what color bath mat we need. We ourselves have allowed IT corporations into our minds. Meanwhile, legal compliance is generally upheld, except for instances of personal data leaks. Users are told if you don't want ads and don't want your personal data tracked, then don't use the site. But in this case, ethics are rarely discussed, and complaints about intrusion into personal space are reluctant. Nonetheless, Facebook ads revolutionized everything. It was precisely due to targeted advertising that the company's revenue growth became exponential. Up to 98% of the company's profit was generated by advertising. This also impacted Mark's fortune. In the year 2006, he had $500 million, and just 4 years later, he had $4 billion. It is clear that this is not the balance on his bank card, and for the most part, it represents the value of his main asset. Nonetheless, one cannot thrive on advertising alone. In the year 2012, Facebook went public with its first initial public offering, an IPO. This was anticipated by investors worldwide. The IPO raised a record $16 billion. Mark instantly became the 29th richest person on the Forbes list with a fortune of $20 billion. However, the growth in capitalization and personal success did not change Mark as a businessman. He continued to find diamonds in the rough, whether it was ideas that Facebook developers churned out daily or businesses and startups in need of an investor. In the early 2010s, a trend developed in Silicon Valley. Startuppers were developing their IT projects with a single goal: to become significant enough to be noticed and acquired by Zuckerberg. And he did acquire. Mark spent billions on a shopping spree in Silicon Valley, and no one could stop him. A prime example is WhatsApp. Today it is the world's largest messenger, but 10 years ago it was not doing so well. Back then, it was running at a loss of $250 million, and Facebook went ahead and acquired it for $21 billion. Why? It's simple. Zuckerberg wasn't just purchasing a messenger or another application, he was acquiring people. At that time, there were around 1 billion users on WhatsApp. Later, the messenger found its footing, and today it generates a considerable $1,200 million in revenue annually. The familiar resurrection mechanism: user data, targeted advertising, profit. Back then, Zuckerberg literally said the following: "There are two ways to win against your competitors: to become better or to buy them." Mark increasingly resorted to the latter. Among his other largest acquisitions are Instagram, the VR headset manufacturer Oculus, and hundreds of other assets worth billions of dollars. The knack for successful projects was transforming the company, but Zuckerberg himself was changing too. A few years later, as the staff expanded and Mark became more of a businessman and top manager than a programmer, working with him became more challenging. Colleagues mentioned that he stopped supporting employees as he used to. If you needed motivation to develop, working for Zuckerberg was no longer for you. There were also reports of his odd behavior. Often, Mark provided no feedback whatsoever. His emotional intelligence narrowed to the core of a mechanical pencil. One of his colleagues recounted, "It often happened that he asked for my opinion, and even if we were alone in the room, I couldn't tell whether he was listening to me or not." In the year 2017, he decided to embark on a sort of tour across America. It resembled either a pre-election rally or sermons. Once he assisted a Dallas high school student with cleaning, other times he met with police or the chief shrimp catcher. He even met with pastors from Texas, despite flaunting his atheism just a few months earlier. This seemed somewhat peculiar. On one hand, Zuckerberg was already considered someone who had permanently changed the world. On the other, the broad audience began to view him as if Mark saw himself as some sort of messiah. Thus emerged his new 3.0 version update, Zuckerberg from Silicon Valley. The Mark of the past was aggressive, loved to disrupt and provoke. The new Mark became a husband and father with a legacy that needed to be multiplied and protected at all costs. Speaking of fatherhood, he named his daughter August in honor of Emperor Octavian. An empire needs warfare and expansion to survive. For Augustus, this meant annexing Egypt, Dalmatia, and Pannonia in Central Europe, where present-day Austria, Hungary, and Slovakia are located, as well as expanding in Africa. For Zuckerberg, it was international expansion and the acquisition of WhatsApp and Instagram. In terms of the number of people absorbed by his empire, Mark certainly surpassed his Roman idol. Today, nearly 4 billion people use his corporation's products. To put this in perspective, just 60 years ago, Earth's population was less than the number of people consuming Zuckerberg's products today. The manner of a friendly neighbor who was on familiar terms with everyone also imitates Augustus's role model. When he ruled, he would spend years away from Rome. This time he spent traveling through regions reminiscent of Zuckerberg's tour of various states. Octavian, like Mark, worked on personal branding. In those days, people rarely knew their rulers by face. There was no television, no newspapers, no printed books, nothing. Octavian began minting coins with his profile and personally met with fellow citizens. He would visit people, dine with the poor, all to be closer to the masses. Mark connected with the public through personal meetings and internet streams. Zuckerberg's problem was this: he was not a politician. Octavian expanded, but the limits of his power were tangible, whereas Mark ventured into the clouds. For instance, in 2016, he allocated $3 billion to, quote, cure all diseases in the world. But there were more significant failures. This was most vividly evident in the so-called metaverse, more precisely in an aimless $40 billion vortex. What is the metaverse in simple terms? It's a broad and vague term that can be basically described as follows. The metaverse is a virtual space where people interact as avatars, meaning your graphical representations. This space can exist in a game, on a forum, or in a video stream. Using virtual reality headsets, sensors and computers, people from different parts of the world can communicate, play, or work together. Do you understand what this means and why it's needed? I understand the definition, but the purpose of all this, not so much. But look, the metaverses are unclear, and Zuckerberg's critics say that it's an innovative product that nobody asked for. You chatted with friends from different cities, strolled through a virtual Paris, played some game. What do you do next? Moreover, there is just the problem of talking over video calls or messaging. Let's invent a toothbrush that flies around the bathroom and applies toothpaste by itself. Fun? Perhaps. Necessary? Doubtful. Secondly, the metaverses are underdeveloped, and the worlds that Mark's company offers people are dull and monotonous. Thirdly, it's uncomfortable. Users say that VR headsets make their faces hurt, and it's not just uncomfortable to walk in them, but even to sit. Many feel nauseous and dizzy in them, and most importantly, it is incredibly expensive both for the company, which has spent $40 billion on it, and for ordinary people. For a questionable experience, consumers are asked to pay not less than $500. Zuckerberg's bet on the metaverses isn't the problem. His decisions have always been bold and not obvious. The problem is that previously Mark could silence all skeptics with a couple of years of active work. We remember the growth of WhatsApp, but today Zuckerberg has presented the world with an unverified hypothesis. Investors went along with it out of old habit, but no revolution has occurred. Thus began a dark period in Zuckerberg's history. As a child, Mark loved Star Wars-themed parties. Today, one could say a childhood dream has come true in its own way. Star Wars, or more aptly, Wars of the Stars, has become a reality for him. In recent years, Mark has been actively feuding with well-known members of the US Congress due to the threats that his products pose to people and national security. That happens when your fortune surpasses the GDP of many countries, and every second person on the planet uses your services. The first alarm sounded in the year 2016, the US elections, in the midst of the race between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And then a massive attack began on Facebook in support of the Republican and sharply against Clinton, what would later be called interference in the US presidential election. Zuckerberg was accused of responding too slowly to the troll posts masquerading as advertising. Estimates suggest that over the course of a few months, these messages were viewed by 150 million people. Mark admitted guilt. They really did react slowly. We will try better next time. Consider it a close call. Only the content on the platform got much worse. And it wasn't just the voters and candidates who suffered. I'm talking about the Rohingya, the Muslim people of Myanmar. In the year 2016, the country's authorities perpetrated a full-scale genocide against the Rohingya. People were arrested, robbed, beaten if they were lucky. Others were raped, murdered, and tortured. According to the latest estimates, 25,000 people have died and over 1 million have fled the country. The genocide continues to this day. Why am I mentioning this? In Myanmar, local web resources are poorly developed. Most of the local news is drawn from Facebook. Half the country used it. And when the situation escalated, the Myanmar Armed Forces and its associated network of bots began spamming the feed with fake news about the Rohingya. The world's largest social network was used for genocide and ethnic persecution. At that time, both the country's residents and the UN turned against Zuckerberg. Mark had to make concessions and the company once again apologized and began to block dangerous accounts. Facebook banned a community with a total audience of 12 million people. The turmoil continues to this day. Last winter, Zuckerberg was summoned to Congress once more, this time for a different reason. According to open data, up to 100,000 children are exploited annually on his corporation's platforms. Adults contact children from anonymous accounts, coercing them into various inappropriate activities, then blackmailing them. It often ends in tragedy, mental disorders, ruined lives, and sometimes even worse. Zuckerberg was lambasted by the entire Congress. Bereaved parents and senators contributed to the attack. As the internet transforms the world into a global village, the question increasingly arises, does the creator of the social network bear responsibility, or can he be blamed for what happens there? It's a philosophical dilemma with no definitive answer, as always. Still, it must be understood that a village is a village, full of archetypes from a real ancient community. Here we have provocateurs and victims. There are racists and xenophobes, and there are those who are offended and thrown off balance by all of this. Ideally, the village head should ensure that his village is peaceful, but at what point does law and order end and surveillance and lawlessness begin? With social networks, finding that boundary is extremely difficult. Regardless, it's not just users who maintain the village spirit online. And here comes Elon Musk onto the scene. We already produced a feature about him, and you surely know that Musk is quite the provocateur. He doesn't watch his words due to health reasons. It's not an excuse, but it's an important factor. The conflict between Elon and Mark, which flared up to the public's amusement, at some point began to resemble a spat between two men in a courtyard. It all started with a rocket. In the year 2016, Elon and Mark agreed with the SpaceX team to launch a Facebook satellite into orbit, all to provide developing countries with internet and demonstrate to skeptics, see what we can do. But the launch failed. Mark publicly wrote that he was deeply upset that SpaceX destroyed our satellite. Elon Musk responded by his standards moderately, "My fault for being an idiot. We gave you a free launch. I think you should have taken care of insurance." Elon Musk's reaction can be explained. You could have kept the quarrel private and not blamed recent partners for the failure. We're here to do business, not a TV show. Over the next 7 years, Musk repeatedly taunted Zuckerberg. For example, when Mark tried to justify artificial intelligence and downplay its threat. Musk was quick to interject, "He doesn't understand anything, his comprehension is limited." There are no more sworn enemies than recent friends. Musk consistently supports campaigns to discredit and cancel Facebook. For instance, when the privacy scandal erupted regarding the sharing of data with third parties, and certainly when the issue arose concerning the connection between mental health and social networks, Musk did not miss the opportunity to once again jab at his former partner. As we have mentioned before, Mark is inspired by Octavian Augustus. Do you know why? Mark himself described it this way. Octavian is the ruler who provided Europe with a 200-year era of peace and tranquility. Yes, he restored order with a firm hand, yet his peace was above all. The only thing Mark glossed over in this historical excursus is that Augustus's era was not so peaceful. Within the empire, it was turbulent. 50 years later, towards the end of the reign of Nero Claudius Caesar, the empire was once again engulfed in civil uprisings. An empire is an empire for a reason, to wage war, to expand, and to be a danger to others. Therefore, during Octavian's rule, one war was replaced by another every couple of years. The same situation applies to Zuckerberg. His desire to maintain and multiply the influence of his own empire in Silicon Valley and beyond is understandable. But Mark, first of all, is not the supreme ruler of a state. And secondly, he is not immune to errors. You can assume the role of an emperor in a board game, but there seems to be slightly fewer similarities than differences between political governance 2,000 years ago and the expansion of an internet giant in the 21st century. As the company expanded from 50,000 employees to 90,000, it became clear that criticizing Mark's decisions was now pointless. One of the original board members of Facebook said that In the end, it became impossible to work with him. He listened to criticism but did not change his behavior. Along with the growing bureaucracy and employee costs, Apple struck a blow to Mark. You remember that Facebook earned revenue, among other things, by selling data. So, in the midst of all these proceedings, Apple changed user agreements. Now, anyone using Zuckerberg's resources from an iPhone had the right to prohibit the company from collecting their personal data. This was a failure. The business model upon which Zuckerberg built his empire suffered a total breakdown. Apple's decision cut advertising revenue by $10 billion a year, and the metaverse brought no revolution. For the first time in his life, Zuckerberg faced a decline in the revenues of his business empire. Initially, neither Mark nor his company showed it, and only the closest insiders reported that Zuckerberg was frightened. The situation with Apple is much worse than it seems. After some time, he himself admitted that the company was going through tough times. Many users began to abandon Facebook. Zuckerberg's personal fortune plummeted from $125 billion to $35 billion, almost fourfold. And all this time, none of his star competitors slowed down. Apple released its virtual reality headset, which caused more of a stir than Zuckerberg's device. Mark faced turbulent times for many years in a row. Congress accused him of loyalty to conservatives, while Elon Musk alleged he sponsored Joe Biden. Some blamed him for child suicides and others berated him for trading personal data. At the same time, a broader audience began to notice other, far more alarming changes in Mark. Almost everyone has a conspiracy theory that they secretly believe in. In this regard, the United States traditionally does not lag behind other countries. In the United States, people in general have a tendency to self-organize into various communities, including conspiratorial ones, which pursue individuals they consider to be villains and suspect of something terrible. And regarding what I will speak about further, I ask you to take it with the utmost seriousness, because right now, the United States is home to an enormous number of people who believe in reptilians or lizard people. We shall not delve into how this came to be. Our video is not about that. It is essential to understand that millions of people, without a hint of irony, think that under his business suit, Zuckerberg hides a long, scaly tail. But what does Mark have to do with any of this? As is often the case in conspiracy theories, everything sounds logical. Look, here is Mark in the year 2005, an absolutely normal guy, and here he is before Congress, looking as if he's forgotten what water tastes like. And here's another photo. Look at those strange, empty eyes he has. During a dialogue, he fixes them on the interlocutor and doesn't divert them for a second. Combined with the features of his face, elongated and at the same time broad, it looks rather odd. Then there is his monotone and lifeless way of speaking. Many genuinely find it reminiscent of the voice from early versions of Google Translator. An empty gaze, a forced smile, strange phrases, hence the conclusion. Mark is not a tired, aged person who has withdrawn into himself, having endured several incredible rises and falls and consequently many episodes of wild stress, with a diminished emotional intelligence and all the joys of fatherhood. Conspiracy theorists discard all this and claim that he is not a person at all, but a lizard that came from Nibiru and very much wants to resemble us. Alternatively, they suggest Mark is a biorobot. But forget the lizards and robots. The truth, why is Mark so strange? There is another explanatory theory, but it is no longer conspiratorial, but quasi-scientific. Internet users, important to note, not doctors, just plain people, diagnose Mark with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism. The film The Social Network played a role in creating this strange and even frightening image. The fame of the character portrayed by Jesse Eisenberg extended far beyond the film. Since the year 2013, a hoax has circulated online. Mark Zuckerberg has finally confessed to having Asperger's syndrome, and people are eager to believe this. The fact is that it is still unknown whether Zuckerberg has any disorders. If we take Elon Musk, for instance, he has publicly acknowledged his diagnosis. He, unashamedly, can insult a person to their face. Not because he is bad, but because his physiology does not perceive these barriers. Against this background, Zuckerberg, who perfectly controls himself, appears quite healthy. But the oddities in Mark's behavior do not end there. The latest news. Mark Zuckerberg, a man worth $180 billion, is building himself a bunker in Hawaii. It would be accurate to say not a bunker, but a real underground city in case of an apocalypse. For this pleasure, Mark paid $270 million. This is far from his first purchase in Hawaii, but certainly the largest. The project includes 30 bedrooms, 30 bathrooms, swimming pools, saunas, tennis courts, guest houses, and much more. At the center of the project are two vast estates the size of a football field, which have everything: elevators, offices, conference halls, and a kitchen the size of an entire enterprise. The Hawaiian bunker has sparked a new wave of rumors. Conspiracy theorists are becoming worried. For heaven's sake, does Zuckerberg know something? Or what is this construction of the century? And while Musk openly worries that neural networks will lead humanity to apocalypse, his counterpart, Mark, reassures everyone. Don't worry. The end of the world is cancelled. And at the same time, he is building a bunker for doomsday. Maybe things are really that bad? Let's break down all these versions and theories point by point. Let's start with his strange image. If we believe a researcher who has studied the persona of Mark for 20 years, everything happened in the year 2013. In the wake of the privacy scandal, Zuckerberg's public image changed. The smiling and lively guy was replaced by a cool and unemotional person who stopped trusting cameras and the public, about the belief in lizard people. Here, with your permission, I will not laboriously explain the absurdity of this concept. Naturally, some people are inclined to find paranormal explanations for his power. We've sorted this out, but what about the bunker? Here, one must understand one thing. Private bunkers are something of a hobby for wealthy individuals. During the Cold War in the United States, private companies were engaged in the construction of bunkers. Normally, bunkers were built in backyards right by the house. But even today, the habits of Americans have not disappeared. If the global situation intensifies, more bunkers appear. It's another matter that everyone builds them within their financial means. But why does Mark need such a huge shelter? It's enough to recolonize the Earth from it. Firstly, he is fully confident that he can manage his money as he wants. And secondly, it is quite possible that he is building it not only for himself, but also for all his business partners, so that, if anything happens, they can settle there with the entire team of developers and top managers and continue working. He already had such an experience. During the pandemic, they all lived in one large mansion. Time to talk about the greatest crisis in Zuckerberg's history. In fact, the days of his company are numbered. If Zuckerberg is a robot, then he knows how to update his firmware very timely. Zuckerberg from Silicon Valley stopped coping with managerial duties. He needed an update. About a year and a half ago, we were introduced to a new, unprecedented version of Zuckerberg, already 4.0. What was different about him? Well, first of all, he fired 21,000 people from the company, almost a quarter of the entire corporation. Replacing the person who blindly believed in success was a pragmatist, a realist, and a tough manager. The company had to survive. Lofty slogans were replaced with a new rule: to do more with less. Then the company's management talked with shareholders, and the company bought back its own shares for $40 billion. Not very economical, but Wall Street appreciated such confidence. The shares soared and brought the company nearly $20 billion that same day. The metaverse. Zuckerberg did not abandon his most controversial mega-project. He continues to pour large funds into it with a visionary certainty that sooner or later it will take off. However, pragmatism is now evident even here. The flow of super profits that Meta received from investors was not directed into the metaverse, but into artificial intelligence and neural networks. These are the products that have real demand here and now. What about corporate wars? Relations with Apple haven't improved, they only got worse. But if previously Zuckerberg was receiving a slap, now he went on the offensive. For example, he criticized Apple's VR headset. If our glasses look the same in a few years, we will have significantly regressed. He decided to beat his main opponent, Elon Musk, both in the ring and in business. When X.com had obvious problems, Mark introduced Threads, a direct competitor to X. Come within a year, Threads had 150 million active users, about a quarter of Elon Musk's social network users. What about the physical fight? It was not a joke. The billionaires supposedly even agreed on a date. They even thought of fighting in the Roman Colosseum until the Italian Ministry of Culture protested. But then something went awry. Musk was quick to say that Mark chickened out, and then Zuckerberg posted this photo, with a bare torso surrounded by fighters. At that time, he was deeply into jiu-jitsu, earned a blue belt, and himself challenged Musk to a fight. When it will happen is unclear, but he does not plan to stop with Musk. After the fight, he wants to make a full-fledged debut in the UFC as a mixed martial arts fighter. Dana White, the head of the organization, has already given his approval for this. All these reputational and business decisions have melted the hearts of both investors and the general public. Even the latest humiliation in Congress saw the stock market respond with another rise in shares. Zuckerberg, in version 4.0, officially overcame the rough patch and personally, outside of the company, climbed back into the top of the global Forbes list. On his 40th birthday, he decided to treat himself to a yacht worth $300 million. Everyone experiences a midlife crisis in their own way. Most importantly, the current version of Mark Zuckerberg strives to emulate the hero of his childhood, Octavian Augustus. With a firm hand, he brought order to his empire. Not only did he pull it out of crisis, but he also expanded it and increased his personal fortune. At the same time, Mark has distanced himself even further from the public. He has hired security with whom he now walks around the office, where he used to casually stroll alone and was willing to talk with anyone. This too resembles Augustus. Essentially, he was the first in the empire to establish his own guard, without which he wouldn't even enter the Senate. However, this also comes with its drawbacks. After reducing 70% of the corporation's personnel, surveys said Zuckerberg is a bad boss, yet he didn't make any concessions. The only opinion that mattered to him during the crisis was that of the investors. It seems Mark, like Augustus, has chosen the path of a lifelong ruler of his empire. What will happen after him? Can the corporation survive without its emperor, upon whose actions, words, and even vision everything depend? The story with Augustus showed that successors may falter, and the system may eventually fail. This is precisely what Zuckerberg should be contemplating, but in different versions and updates.